The year 1994 unveiled an extraordinary botanical secret when David Noble, during a routine trek, happened upon trees that defied all known scientific understanding. Towering up to 40 meters, these specimens distributed peculiar bark and dense foliage, eerily reminiscent of a colossal fern. Noble carefully snapped off a small branch, securing it in his backpack. When botanists later examined the sample, their disbelief was absolute. This was Wollemia, a genus of tree long presumed to have disappeared from the Earth's surface some 2 million years prior. Fewer than 60 mature specimens remained in their wild habitat. Nearly everyone was genetically indistinguishable, a living relic cloned from a singular ancient progenitor. Australia immediately initiated a monumental and unprecedented operation to safeguard the species. Never before had a plant required simultaneous concealment from human intrusion and massive propagation efforts to ensure its survival. Yet, the most formidable challenges of this unfolding narrative were only just beginning to emerge. Initial reactions from specialists were marked by profound caution. Days after his initial find, Noble presented the branch to Wynne Jones, a botanist affiliated with the National Park Service. Jones meticulously scrutinized the dried foliage, but could offer no definitive pronouncement. The scarcity of material simply precluded any firm conclusion. He sought the expertise of botanists from the Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney, who also failed to recognize the species. A month later, the dedicated team ventured back into the remote canyon to meticulously document their find, collecting bark, cones, and fertile material. It would take an additional year before the discovery was formally described. In 1995, the esteemed journal Tilapia published an article announcing a new genus and species, Wollemia nobilis, a name honoring both Wollemi National Park and Noble himself. Prior to this revelation, the species was known solely from fossilized rock impressions dating back as far as 90 million years. The Araucariaceae family, which encompasses the Wollemi Pine, kauri, and Araucaria, once dominated the forests of the southern hemisphere during the age of dinosaurs. This particular lineage within that family tree was widely believed to have ceased to exist millions of years ago. Instead, it had been quietly thriving within a solitary gorge, merely 150 kilometers from Australia's largest metropolis. Its existence unnoticed because the canyon's depths are accessible only by specialized rope techniques or helicopter. Almost immediately following its unveiling, the species found itself imperiled by the very individuals striving to preserve it. A helicopter dispatched to gather cones for research inadvertently severed branches from one of the precious trees with its rotor blades. The National Park Service quickly realized that any careless intervention could result in the species' demise. The precise coordinates of the gorge were classified as top secret. Even today, the exact location is known only to a select few who gain entry after meticulously adhering to strict biosecurity protocols, including the use of sterilized footwear. The underlying challenge, however, proved to be more profound than mere secrecy could address. All surviving trees were concentrated across 4 distinct sites within a single gorge system, spanning an area less than 10 square kilometers. Genetic analyses revealed no discernible differences whatsoever among any of the individual trees. Researchers meticulously examined dozens of diverse genetic markers, yet the outcome remained consistently the same. Scientists theorized that the species endured a critical genetic bottleneck between 10,000 and 26,000 years ago, a period when its population may have dwindled to a mere 1 or 2 trees. Every single tree flourishing in that gorge today is, in essence, a clone of that identical ancient ancestor. The very reason this tree managed to persist for such an extended period with such limited genetic diversity lies in a distinctive anatomical trait, rather than any inherent genetic advantage. Wollemia nobilis possesses the remarkable ability to coppice autonomously, sending forth new trunks from dormant buds nestled near the base of an older tree, even in the absence of any damage. Individual specimens have been documented with more than 40 trunks emerging from a single, unified root system. This implies that a tree considered by science to be a single organism could, in fact, be hundreds of years older than any individual trunk visible above the ground. An aged trunk may perish, only to be seamlessly replaced by a new one stemming from the identical root network. It is this unique capacity, rather than any inherent fire resistance in its leaves or bark, that likely enabled the species to endure the localized minor fires that periodically sweep through the canyon. However, This strategy would offer no defense against a truly devastating firestorm on the expansive sandstone plateaus situated above the gorge. This unique vulnerability highlights why secrecy became a matter of survival rather than merely a bureaucratic directive. A species that had navigated 200 million years of climatic shifts, continental drift, and the grand extinction of the dinosaurs, now possessed such profound genetic uniformity that a single pathogen could, in theory, decimate the entire wild population in one swift blow. In November 2005, this dire scenario nearly became a reality. Just weeks after the species had been officially presented to the global community, wild trees were discovered to be infected with Phytophthora cinnamomi, a pernicious water mold known for attacking plant roots. Rangers surmised that the pathogen had been introduced by unauthorized visitors who had entered the gorge without proper clearance. The response quickly evolved into a dual-pronged strategy executed simultaneously. On one front, the absolute protection of the wild grove, down to its last branch, was paramount. On the other, a massive program of propagation and worldwide distribution of the species was initiated, ensuring that even a catastrophic event within that solitary gorge would not spell the end for Wollemia nobilis. Collecting seeds directly from the wild was deemed too hazardous, as any interference could jeopardize the nascent plants. Instead, a cutting propagation program was swiftly launched. The Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney, alongside a team of expert horticulturists, including David Van Berkel, who spearheaded the seedling distribution efforts, cultivated thousands of clones from a limited number of parent lines. Before achieving thousands of clones, researchers at Mount Annan first had to overcome a fundamental hurdle: how to induce a Wollemi pine cutting to root at all. For most conifers, this process involves treating the cut end with synthetic auxin-based hormones, a standard horticultural practice that yields success with Wollemi pine relatives like the Norfolk Island pine. Initial trial treatments applying these same hormones to Wollemi pine cuttings, however, produced inconsistent and ambiguous results. Consequently, the team decided to explore the simplest possible explanation. What if hormones were not required at all? A meticulously controlled experiment provided a clear and unequivocal answer. Cuttings rooted without any chemical assistance whatsoever, 71% of tip cuttings and 82% lower stem cuttings successfully produced roots on their own. Moreover, the addition of hormone treatment yielded no improvement in these results. A tree that is genetically almost indistinguishable from itself proved remarkably easy to propagate precisely because of this unique characteristic. And that became a pivotal factor, allowing the mass cloning program to scale up so rapidly. The very coppicing mechanism that helps the tree survive minor fires or damage within its wild canyon habitat meant that numerous cuttings could be harvested from each mature tree without causing it harm. The tree's innate tendency to generate new trunks from hidden buds unexpectedly proved a vital asset to the propagation program. The same biological trait that had safeguarded the species for millions of years within a single gorge now facilitated its global dissemination. The general public learned of this monumental discovery even before the scientific community, thanks to a single impactful article. On the 14th of December, 1994, even prior to the species' formal description, James Woodford, a journalist for the Sydney Morning Herald, published a front-page story under a headline declaring the discovery of a living tree from the age of dinosaurs. The piece appeared mere months after the initial find, while botanists were still diligently working to identify the samples, and it instantly reverberated across media outlets worldwide. That same year, the esteemed journal Nature characterized the find as a prehistoric pine that Australia was honoring. The then director of the Royal Botanic Gardens famously dubbed it the botanical equivalent of unearthing a living miniature dinosaur on Earth, a turn of phrase quoted for decades thereafter. Due to this global attention, individual trees within the gorge began to acquire their own names, not merely scientific designations, but the names of the individuals instrumental in the species' discovery and protection. The tree from which Noble took his inaugural sample was named in his honor, while others bore the names of the scientists involved in its identification. On the 23rd of October, 2005, 11 years after Noble's initial discovery, the Royal Botanic Garden officially introduced the Wollemi pine to the world. Prior presentations had already captivated audiences in London, Frankfurt, and Tokyo. On that very same day in Sydney, Sotheby's conducted an auction of a first-generation collector's edition, 292 seedlings offered across 148 lots. Each seedling came with a certificate, meticulously tracing its lineage back to one of 15 specific wild parent trees, detailing that parent tree's height, girth, and number of trunks. More than 400 buyers and journalists convened beneath a marquee near the Royal Gardens Herbarium. Bidding commenced at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and concluded within 3 hours, resulting in a white glove sale, meaning every single lot was sold. Only the second such outcome in the auction house's history in Australia. The cumulative total amounted to $1,059,165 Australian dollars, encompassing the buyer's premium and tax, more than double Sotheby's conservative low estimate. The most valuable lot, a 15-tree collection christened Sir Joseph Banks, commanded $135,625 before tax. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, the same buyer ultimately acquired 47 trees in total for approximately $230,000. A consignance of 20 trees, intended for a Parisian avenue, went to a buyer for just $21,600. The subsequent 14 years passed without dramatic shifts. Seedlings simply continued to proliferate globally, finding homes in nurseries, private gardens, and botanical collections across every continent with a temperate climate. The species, it seemed, was cured. At that juncture, it appeared as though the most arduous phase of the endeavor was complete. The most dramatic examination of the entire strategy arrived with the 2019 to 2020 fire season. The Gospers Mountain megafire, ignited by a lightning strike in October, ravaged more than 512,000 hectares and bore down relentlessly on Wollemi National Park. New South Wales Environment Minister Matt Keane described what ensued as an unprecedented intervention. Large air tankers deployed fire retardant in a protective ring around the precious grove. Specialist firefighting crews were lowered by ropes from helicopters directly into the gorge to establish an irrigation system, aiming to keep the ground moist as the inferno swept through. The objective was straightforward. If fire reached the trees, it needed to burn as a cool ground fire rather than a scorching, destructive one. Everyone involved in the operation was sworn to secrecy regarding the precise location. The fire did ultimately reach the grove. For 4 agonizing days, the smoke was so dense that crews were unable to discern whether their plan had succeeded. Keane later recounted that everyone was collectively holding their breath, waiting for news. On the 15th of January, 2020, the government officially announced the outcome. A few trees were scorched, 2 perished, but the rest endured. The wild population held steadfast. However, by 2020, the species had long since ceased to depend solely on that one isolated gorge. In 2006, seedlings became available for purchase in nurseries at a retail price of between $55 and $95 per tree. This was a fraction of the cost of a coffee and a sandwich on auction day for a species that just 1 year earlier had commanded $6,000 per tree. 6 groves were generously donated to conservation organizations in Australia, New Zealand, Britain, Germany, and Japan. To this very day, Wollemi pines flourish in gardens and parks around the world, from the meticulously curated botanical gardens of Sydney to private yards in northern England. Not a single documented instance of illegal collection from the wild has ever been recorded. The distribution strategy proved so thoroughly successful that the demand for wild specimens simply vanished. Alongside the global sale of clones, the recovery team embarked on another experiment, one largely unknown outside scientific circles. In the mid-2010s, researchers spearheaded by Heidi Zimmer of the Australian Botanic Garden meticulously planted a group of Wollemia nobilis seedlings at a new wild location, specifically selected as a safeguard against a single point of failure. It was an ambitious endeavor to establish a secondary wild population from the ground up. 2 years later, 85% of the transplanted plants had successfully survived. Interestingly, these transplanted trees diversified into 2 distinct groups. Some exhibited minimal growth, yet nearly all of them survived, with a remarkable 94% success rate. Others grew more rapidly but succumbed more frequently, with only 69% making it to the experiment's conclusion. The determining factor was not genetics, as all the plants were genetically identical, but rather the condition of the seedling at the time of transplanting and the amount of light that penetrated that specific opening in the forest canopy. Within the wild gorge, relying solely on seed for regeneration offers a tenuous hope. Seed viability for Wollemia nobilis hovers at roughly 10%, and a quarter of those viable seeds are damaged by animals before they even have a chance to germinate. In the wild, the number of new seedlings fluctuates wildly year to year. Some years yield none at all, while others may see as many as 60 emerge simultaneously. Of those that do germinate, 65% perish within their first year. However, those that endure past that critical first year possess a genuine chance of long-term survival. Over 16 years of diligent monitoring, 44% of established young plants survived to the study's end, growing at a remarkably slow pace of less than 2 centimeters per year in the deep shade cast by the mature trees. The precise cause of this bottleneck between germination and survival remains unclear. Potential factors include insufficient light, an accumulation of leaf litter, soil pathogens, or a deficiency in the correct microbial root partners. Data collected after the fire unveiled insights nobody had previously been able to observe. It revealed precisely how a mature wild Wollemi pine responds to fire under natural conditions. Before 2019, this kind of observational opportunity simply had not existed. A fire of that magnitude had never reached the grove during the period it had been under human surveillance. This invaluable information has since been integrated into the long-term fire risk management plan for the species. Fieldwork on this species carries a particular complication that has persisted even after 30 years of dedicated research. Due to its coppicing ability, scientists are still unable to state with absolute certainty how many genetically distinct trees are truly flourishing within the gorge. Several trunks that outwardly appear to be separate trees may in fact share the same underlying root system. This makes even the seemingly simple question of how many trees remain more challenging to answer than it sounds. Following the 2019 to 2020 fires, it became evident that merely distributing clones to gardens around the world was insufficient. In October 2023, a new phase of the program was launched, a so-called meta collection. More than 170 young trees, cultivated in Sydney from an enhanced genetic selection of parent lines, were dispatched to 28 botanical gardens across the United Kingdom and Europe via the Bedgebury Nursery in Kent. Additionally, 5 gardens in Australia and 1 in the United States, specifically in Atlanta, received these vital specimens. The overarching objective is to consolidate every fragment of genetic variation discoverable among the clones and strategically disseminate it across multiple climate zones simultaneously. This ensures that no single catastrophic event, whether natural or human-induced, could eradicate every lineage at once. Meanwhile, trees planted back in the mid-2010s have begun to mature sufficiently to produce their own seeds. In October 2025, at Wakehurst, Kew's sister garden in Sussex, the nursery team documented what botanists are calling a bumper year. Instead of the customary 20 to 30 seeds per season, the cones yielded an astonishing 168, of which approximately 134 proved to be potentially viable. This momentous development made it possible, for the very first time, to deposit seeds collected at Wakehurst itself into the Millennium Seed Bank, the world's largest wild plant seed vault, which coincidentally marked its own 25th anniversary that same year. Every seed nestled within that vault represents, in theory, a new genetic combination that officially should not exist within a species that, by all scientific accounts, lost its genetic variation tens of thousands of years ago. For more in-depth explorations of remarkable botanical survival and discovery, consider subscribing to our channel.